This isn't just a story you're about to hear. It's a front-row seat to a real-life implosion. We're going to watch as a 20-year veteran of the friendly skies, a woman whose crisp uniform and practiced smile were her armor, has her entire world dismantled. Not by a catastrophic engine failure, not by a hijacker, but by a single devastating misjudgment. She wielded her authority like a weapon, targeting a passenger for the audacity of speaking up. But in the ensuing chaos, a small laminated card would fall from a wallet, not only exonerating the accused, but ignominiously exposing the accuser. This isn't just a story of airport drama. It's a real-life cautionary tale of how a moment of prejudice can trigger a free fall from grace. A fall that just keeps going until it hits rock bottom. The karma in this story isn't just hard, it's relentless. The air in Gate C-37 of Charlotte Douglas International Airport was thick with the usual cocktail of stale coffee, recycled air, and the low-grade anxiety of impending travel. It was a Tuesday morning in late September, the kind of day that promises the crispness of autumn, but still clings to the oppressive humidity of a Carolina summer. Travelers milled about, a sea of weary faces glued to their phones, their carry-on luggage huddled around them like loyal pets. At the center of this mundane tableau, behind the imposing gray counter of American Airlines, stood Linda Peterson. At 52, Linda was a fixture at CLT. Her blonde hair, a shade brighter than nature intended, was immaculately coiffed in a helmet-like bob that hadn't changed since the late 90s. Her uniform, a navy blue blazer and matching skirt, was perfectly pressed, a testament to her meticulous nature. 23 years with the airline had honed her into a model of efficiency, a gate agent who could handle a delayed flight and a plane load of irate passengers with the practiced ease of a seasoned orchestra conductor. But beneath the veneer of professional calm, a quiet storm was brewing in Linda's world. Her husband Gary had been laid off from his textile job 6 months prior, and the anemic pitter-patter of his job search was a constant drumming worry in the back of her mind. Her youngest Kevin was struggling at Appalachian State, his grades a mess, and his calls home infrequent and monosyllabic. The crisp uniform, the unwavering smile, they were less a reflection of her inner state and more a carefully constructed fortress. Today, the fortress was showing cracks. A system-wide software update had thrown the boarding process into chaos. Boarding passes were scanning intermittently, seat assignments were mysteriously shifting, and the printer was spewing out gibberish instead of luggage tags. Linda's usual unflappable demeanor was being tested. Her smile was tight, her movements jerky. The line of passengers snaking from her counter was a multi-headed hydra of impatience. "I'm sorry, sir," she repeated for what felt like the 100th time, her voice a strained monotone. "We're experiencing a system-wide issue. We're working to resolve it." The man in front of her, a portly businessman with a florid face, wasn't having it. "Working to resolve it? I've been standing here for 20 minutes. I have a connecting flight in Dallas." Linda's fingers tapped a frantic rhythm on the keyboard. "I understand your frustration, sir. We're all in the same boat." "No, we're not," she thought, a bitter taste rising in her throat. "You're on your way to some cushy business meeting. I'm stuck here dealing with your entitled attitude for $13 an hour." It was in this pressure cooker environment that Dr. Imani Williams approached the gate. At 36, Imani was the epitome of understated elegance. She wore a pair of tailored black trousers, a simple silk blouse, and comfortable yet stylish flats. Her hair was styled in intricate locks adorned with a few silver beads that caught the light. In her hand, she held a worn leather satchel, and her calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the frayed nerves of the other passengers. Imani was a pediatric cardiologist on her way to a conference in Phoenix, where she was scheduled to present her latest research. It was a trip she'd been looking forward to, a chance to connect with colleagues and escape the relentless demands of her practice. She'd been a doctor for over a decade, and the weight of her responsibilities, the tiny, fragile hearts she held in her hands, the life or death decisions she made on a daily basis, had etched a quiet seriousness into her features. As she neared the gate, she overheard snippets of the escalating tension. She saw the gate agent's strained expression, the growing restlessness of the crowd. Having been a frequent flyer for most of her adult life, she recognized the telltale signs of a travel day gone wrong. She took a deep breath, a silent prayer for patience on her lips. Her turn at the counter finally came. She offered Linda a small, polite smile. "Good morning. I was just hoping to get an update on the boarding situation for Flight 1982 to Phoenix." Linda, who had just finished a tense exchange with another irate passenger, barely looked up. "We're delayed." She clipped out her eyes, still glued to her computer screen. "I understand that," Imani replied, her voice even and calm. "I was just wondering if you had an estimated time of departure. I have a presentation to give this afternoon, and I need to let the conference organizers know if I'll be late." It was a reasonable question, asked in a reasonable tone. But to Linda, already at the end of her tether, it was just another demand, another entitled passenger who thought their schedule was more important than anyone else's. And in that moment, a toxic brew of stress, personal anxieties, and deeply ingrained unconscious biases began to bubble to the surface. Linda looked up, really looked at Imani for the first time. She saw a black woman, her hair in what Linda would have described to her friends as ethnic, her calm demeanor somehow interpreted as condescending. "Ma'am," Linda said, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that was more insulting than outright hostility. "As I've told everyone else, we will board when the system is back online. Everyone is somewhere they need to be." Imani felt a familiar prickle of unease. It was a tone she knew well, the patronizing dismissal that was often deployed when her very presence, her very confidence was seen as a challenge. Still, she maintained her composure. "I'm not asking for special treatment," she said, her voice still quiet, but with a newfound firmness. "I'm simply asking for information. It's your job to provide that, isn't it?" The words, though true, were a match to a powder keg. Linda's carefully constructed facade shattered. "My job," she snapped, her voice rising in pitch. "My job is to deal with people like you all day. People who think the rules don't apply to them, people who think they can just waltz up here and make demands." The sudden outburst sent a ripple of silence through the waiting area. All eyes were now on the two women at the counter. Imani, for her part, was stunned into a momentary silence. She had done nothing to provoke such a reaction. She had spoken calmly, respectfully. The accusation that she thought the rules didn't apply to her was so far from the truth, so utterly baseless, that it took her a moment to even process it. "People like me," Imani repeated, her voice now laced with a steely coldness. "What exactly do you mean by people like me?" It was a direct challenge, a demand for Linda to articulate the prejudice that was so clearly fueling her tirade. And Linda, caught in her own emotional tailspin, doubled down. "I mean people who are being disruptive," she said, her face flushed, her eyes blazing with a self-righteous fury. "You're raising your voice. You're causing a scene. You need to calm down." This was a classic gaslighting technique, one that Imani had seen used time and time again. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't caused a scene. Linda was the one who was yelling. But in that moment, Linda was the one with the uniform, the one with the authority. And she was using that authority to paint Imani as the aggressor. "I am perfectly calm," Imani said, her voice low and steady, a stark contrast to Linda's shrill tones. "I asked a simple question. You are the one who is escalating this situation." But Linda was no longer listening. In her mind, she had already cast Imani in the role of the angry, aggressive black woman, a stereotype she'd absorbed from a lifetime of media portrayals and unspoken societal biases. She saw Imani not as a doctor, a professional, a respected member of her community, but as a threat. "That's it," Linda declared, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and a strange, exhilarating sense of power. "I've had enough of your attitude. You're a security risk. I'm calling the police." The words hung in the air, heavy and menacing. The police? For asking a question? For speaking up? The absurdity of the threat was matched only by its chilling seriousness. Imani stared at Linda, a wave of disbelief washing over her. This wasn't just a case of bad customer service anymore. This was something far more sinister. As Linda reached for the phone behind the counter, a collective gasp went through the crowd. A young woman a few feet away, a student with a backpack and a nose ring, started recording on her phone. An older man in a business suit shook his head in disgust. The atmosphere in Gate C-37 had shifted from one of weary impatience to one of raw, palpable tension. The mundane had become menacing. The gathering storm had finally broken. And in the heart of the tempest stood two women, their lives about to be irrevocably changed by a single toxic encounter. The drama had only just begun. The karma, however, was already taking notes. The threat of calling the police was a line crossed a Rubicon of irrational escalation. For Imani, the world seemed to slow down, the ambient noise of the airport fading into a dull roar. The faces of the other passengers blurred into a gallery of shocked curious and a few disturbingly indifferent expressions. Her mind, trained to remain calm in the face of life-and-death medical emergencies, went into a state of hyper-focus. She was no longer just a traveler trying to get to a conference. She was a black woman being threatened with law enforcement for daring to question a white woman in a position of authority. The script was as old as the nation itself and just as ugly. "You're calling the police." Imani's voice was a marvel of control, each word precise and devoid of the tremor of rage she felt vibrating in her chest. "On what grounds? For asking for an estimated departure time, for speaking up." She deliberately used Linda's own words, turning them back on her like a mirror. Linda, however, was too far gone in her self-righteous crusade to see the precipice she was teetering on. Her hand was already on the receiver of the desk phone. For being aggressive, for being disruptive, for failing to comply with the instructions of a gate agent. She recited the phrases as if reading from a manual, a mantra, to justify the unjustifiable. "I have complied with every instruction," Imani stated, her gaze unwavering. "The only non-compliance here is your refusal to do your job and your subsequent baseless and discriminatory accusations." The word discriminatory hit Linda like a slap. "How dare you?" she hissed, her face contorting with indignation. "This has nothing to do with race. It has to do with your behavior." A scoff escaped from a man standing in the priority boarding lane, a tall, well-dressed black man in his late 40s named Marcus Thorne. He was a corporate lawyer, and he had been watching the entire exchange with a growing sense of outrage. He knew this dance all too well. "Her behavior has been impeccable," Marcus said, his voice a low, authoritative rumble that cut through the tension. "Yours, on the other hand, has been unprofessional and, frankly, abusive." Linda's head whipped around to face him. Her eyes narrowed. "Sir, this does not concern you. Stay out of it, or I'll have you removed as well." The threat was laughable, but the venom behind it was real. Marcus simply raised an eyebrow, a silent challenge. He wasn't going anywhere. It was in this supercharged moment, as Linda began dialing, that the universe, or perhaps the fickle gods of airport karma, decided to intervene. Imani, needing to retrieve her identification in anticipation of the police arriving, reached into her satchel and pulled out her wallet. It was a well-loved leather wallet, soft and slightly worn at the edges. As she fumbled with the clasp, her hands trembling slightly despite her best efforts to remain steady, the wallet slipped. It didn't fall far, just a few inches onto the worn linoleum floor, but the impact was enough to dislodge several of its contents: a few credit cards, a crisp $20 bill, a coffee shop loyalty card, and one other item, a small laminated card with a distinctive blue and gold seal, skittered out from the wallet's embrace. The card slid across the floor and came to rest directly at the base of the counter, face up. For a few seconds, no one seemed to notice. The drama was still focused on Linda's phone call, but then a young woman in the front row of seats, the same one who had been filming, gasped and pointed. "Look," she said, her voice a loud whisper. Slowly heads turned. Eyes followed her pointed finger. And there, in the harsh fluorescent light of the gate area, lay the small, innocuous-looking card that was about to detonate the entire situation. Federal Aviation Administration. The words were printed in bold official lettering across the top. Below them, a photograph of Imani, professional and smiling, stared up from the lamination. And beneath her name, Dr. Imani Williams was her title, Designated Aviation Medical Examiner. A collective sharp intake of breath seemed to suck the air out of the gate area. The silence that followed was profound, a vacuum of disbelief. Marcus Thorne, the lawyer, let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned," he murmured. Linda, who had just begun to speak into the phone, "Yes, I need police assistance at gate C37, trailed off. Her eyes, like everyone else's, were fixed on the card. The blood drained from her face, leaving her with a pasty, slack-jawed expression. The practiced mask of authority crumbled, revealing the raw panic beneath. An aviation medical examiner, an AME, a doctor specifically designated by the FAA to medically certify pilots, a person who held the careers, the livelihoods of pilots in her hands, a person who was in the intricate hierarchy of the aviation world, several rungs above a gate agent, a person who was, in a very real sense, a part of the very system Linda was weaponizing against her. Imani looked down at the card, then back up at Linda. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The card said it all. The irony was so thick, so crushingly absolute, it was almost comical. Here was Linda, a gate agent for American Airlines, calling the police on an FAA-appointed doctor for being a security risk. Slowly, deliberately, Imani bent down and picked up her ID. She held it between her thumb and forefinger, not as a weapon, but as a statement of fact. She slid it back into her wallet, her movements calm and measured. The act itself was an assertion of her identity, her professionalism, her right to exist in this space without harassment. Linda, meanwhile, was frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. The voice on the other end, a dispatcher, was a tinny, "Ma'am, what is the nature of the emergency?" But Linda couldn't speak. Her mind was a maelstrom of confusion, fear, and a dawning, horrifying realization of the magnitude of her miscalculation. She had not just picked a fight with a passenger. She had picked a fight with the FAA. The other passengers, who had been a mostly passive audience, were now a murmuring jury. The whispers were a torrent of, "Oh my God, did you see that? And she is so fired." The young woman with the phone was still recording her lens, capturing every second of Linda's public unraveling. Marcus Thorne, the lawyer, stepped forward, his demeanor now shifting from that of a concerned bystander to a man taking charge. He addressed Linda directly, his voice calm, but with an edge of steel. "I suggest you hang up that phone," he said. "Right now." Linda blinked as if waking from a trance. She looked at the phone in her hand as if it were a venomous snake. With a trembling hand, she placed it back in its cradle. "Now," Marcus continued, his eyes boring into hers. "I believe you owe Dr. Williams an apology, a very sincere one." But an apology was beyond Linda's capabilities at that moment. The only thing her mind could process was the image of that FAA ID, the symbol of a world she had so spectacularly, so publicly misjudged. She had built her career on following the rules, on maintaining order. But in a fit of pique, fueled by a prejudice, she would never admit till she had broken the most fundamental rule of all: you don't mess with the FAA. The doors to the jet bridge, which had been a source of so much frustration, suddenly seemed like the gates to hell. The flight to Phoenix was the last thing on her mind. Her own flight, her career, her life as she knew it, was in a nosedive, and she had just realized with chilling certainty that she was the one who had sent it there. The karma wasn't just coming for her. It had already arrived, and it was wearing a silk blouse and carrying a well-worn leather satchel. The hard part she was about to learn was the impact. Just as a fragile, stunned silence settled over the gate, two figures in the dark blue uniforms of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department appeared. The dispatcher, having received a call about a disturbance that was then abruptly terminated, had followed protocol and sent a unit to investigate. The arrival of Officer Miller, a burly middle-aged white man with a weary expression, and his younger partner, Officer Chen, a sharp-eyed Asian-American woman in her late 20s, instantly ratcheted the tension back up. Their presence was a stark physical manifestation of Linda's threat. For a moment, the power dynamic seemed to shift back in her favor. She was the one who had summoned them, the one who held the institutional authority. A flicker of her earlier self-righteousness returned to her eyes. "Officers, thank you for coming," Linda said, her voice still a bit shaky, but regaining its official tone. "This woman," she gestured towards Imani, "was causing a disturbance. She was being aggressive and refusing to follow my instructions." Officer Miller's gaze fell upon Imani. He saw a well-dressed black woman standing calmly, her expression unreadable. He had seen this scene play out 1,000 times in the airport. Usually it was a case of too much to drink or a missed flight. His face settled into a mask of bored procedure. "Ma'am, what's your side of the story?" he asked Imani, his tone non-committal. Before Imani could speak, Marcus Thorne, the lawyer, stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of her. "Officer," he began, his voice the epitome of calm reason. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I'm an attorney, and I witnessed the entire exchange. This woman," he gestured to Linda, "is making a false report. Dr. Williams," he emphasized the title, "was not aggressive in any way. She simply asked for information about the flight delay. Gate Agent Peterson here," he pointedly used her last name from her name tag, "responded with unprovoked hostility, and then when Dr. Williams calmly defended herself, escalated the situation by calling you." Officer Miller's eyes narrowed slightly. The mention of attorney always made things more complicated. He glanced from Marcus to Imani, then back to Linda. "She was yelling, she was disruptive." Linda insisted, her voice rising again. "Ask anyone, they all saw it." She gestured vaguely at the crowd of passengers. "It was a gamble, and it backfired spectacularly. The young woman with the phone, whose name was Sarah Jenkins, a journalism student at UNC Chapel Hill, stepped forward holding up her device. "I have the entire thing on video, officer," she said, her voice clear and confident. "And it shows the exact opposite of what she's claiming. It shows her screaming at this passenger for no reason." Officer Chen, who had been quietly observing, took a step towards Sarah. "Ma'am, would you be willing to share that video with us?" "Absolutely," Sarah said, already tapping at her screen. Linda's face, which had regained some color, went sheet white again. A video. The entire humiliating episode, her unhinged rant, the moment of stunned silence after the ID fell, it was all captured. The subjective, "he said, she said," had just been rendered obsolete by objective digital proof. As Sarah and Officer Chen huddled over the phone, Officer Miller turned his full attention back to Imani. "Dr. Williams, is it?" he asked, his tone shifting perceptibly. It was a small thing, the use of her title, but it was a sign that the ground was shifting beneath Linda's feet. "Yes, officer," Imani replied. "Dr. Imani Williams," and she decided in that moment that there was no reason to hide. She had done nothing wrong. She opened her wallet again and handed her driver's license to the officer. As she did, she made sure the FAA ID was clearly visible. Officer Miller took the license, but his eyes, like everyone else's before him, were drawn to the other card. He glanced at it, then did a double-take. He looked from the photo on the FAA ID to Imani's face, then back again. He looked at his partner, who was now watching the video with a deepening frown on her face. A slow, dawning comprehension spread across Officer Miller's features. He had been a cop in Charlotte for 15 years. He knew the airport beat. He knew who the FAA was. He knew that an aviation medical examiner was not just some random passenger. He also knew that filing a false police report was a crime. He handed Imani's license back to her, his movements respectful. "Thank you, doctor," he said. He then turned to Linda, and his entire demeanor had changed. The bored procedural mask was gone. In its place was a look of profound disappointment and official coldness. "Ma'am," he said to Linda, his voice now hard and clipped, "I think you and I need to have a talk. Over here. Now." He gestured towards the end of the counter, away from the prying eyes and ears of the passengers. Linda, looking utterly defeated, followed him, her steps slow and shuffling like a prisoner being led to the gallows. Officer Chen finished watching the video. She looked up at Sarah and then at Imani. "Thank you, Ms. Jenkins," she said to the student. Then she turned to Imani and said, "Dr. Williams, on behalf of the department, I apologize for the inconvenience. It's clear from this video that you were the victim here." The apology, so simple and direct, was a balm on Imani's frayed nerves. "Thank you, officer," she said, a genuine warmth in her voice. At the other end of the counter, the conversation between Officer Miller and Linda was inaudible, but Linda's body language spoke volumes. She gesticulated wildly at first, then her shoulders slumped. She wiped at her eyes. Officer Miller stood arms crossed, listening impassively, shaking his head from time to time. The karma, it turned out, was not a slow-moving cosmic force. Today, it wore a badge and a body cam. After a few minutes, a man in a sharp suit, the American Airlines station manager, summoned by another gate agent, arrived on the scene. His name was David Chen, a man known for his calm demeanor and his ability to put out corporate fires. He was briefed by Officer Miller, his face growing more and more grim as the story unfolded. He cast a quick, apologetic glance towards Imani, before turning his attention to the train wreck that was his employee. David's conversation with Linda was short and brutal. He spoke in low, clipped tones, but the finality of his words was unmistakable. Linda was seen nodding, tears streaming down her face now. She was told to gather her personal belongings from the break room and that she was being placed on immediate indefinite suspension pending a full investigation. She was to be escorted from the premises. Her airport ID was confiscated on the spot. In the space of less than 30 minutes, Linda Peterson had gone from a queen in her small airport kingdom to a pariah stripped of her authority and her job, her professional life in ruins. As she was being led away by the station manager, her face a mask of shame and disbelief, she had to walk past the long line of passengers who were now finally beginning to board the flight to Phoenix. The system ironically had come back online in the midst of the chaos. No one met her gaze. They stared at their phones, at their boarding passes, at the floor, anywhere but at the woman who had caused such a scene. Her final humiliation came as she walked past Imani. For a fleeting second, their eyes met. In Imani's gaze, there was no triumph, no malice. There was only a profound, weary sadness. Linda in that moment saw not the aggressive woman she had invented in her mind, but a fellow human being who she had wronged deeply and unforgivably. The weight of that realization, more than the loss of her job or the public shaming, was the heaviest blow of all. She quickly looked away, a sob catching in her throat. As Imani finally stepped onto the jet bridge, her satchel in hand, Marcus Thorne fell into step beside her. "I hope you're okay," he said, his voice gentle. "I will be," Imani replied, taking a deep breath of the stale, conditioned air. "Thank you for stepping in. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Marcus said, a grim set to his jaw. "We have to have each other's backs. That's the only way things will ever change." He handed her his business card. "If you need anything, and I mean anything, a witness statement, legal advice, anything, you call me." "Thank you, Marcus," Imani said, taking the card. "I'm Imani." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Imani, under the circumstances," he said with a wry smile. As she found her seat in first class, a complimentary upgrade hastily arranged by a profusely apologetic station manager, Imani finally allowed herself to exhale. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. The incident had been ugly, stressful, and deeply upsetting. But as the plane pushed back from the gate, she felt a small, hard kernel of something else resolve. This wasn't just about a rude gate agent. It was about the casual, everyday racism that simmered just beneath the surface of society, ready to boil over at the slightest provocation. It was about the way a black woman's confidence could be so easily misinterpreted as aggression, her questions as demands. The video Sarah Jenkins had taken was already starting to go viral. By the time Imani landed in Phoenix, her story would be headline news. The hard karma that had hit Linda Peterson was just the beginning. The ripples of that morning's events at Gate C-37 were about to spread far and wide, and the story was far from over. Linda's fall was just the first act. The real-life drama was about to get a whole lot more complicated. By the time Flight 1882 touched down at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport, the story of Gate C-37 was no longer a localized incident. It had metastasized into a full-blown viral sensation. Sarah Jenkins, the journalism student, had uploaded her video to Twitter with a simple factual caption, "American Airlines gate agent in Charlotte calls police on a black woman for speaking up." The woman, it turns out, is an FAA doctor. Hot flying while black. American Airlines. She tagged American Airlines, several major news outlets, and a few prominent civil rights activists. The video, raw and unfiltered, was a powder keg. Linda Peterson's shrill, accusatory voice, Imani Williams' preternatural calm, the audible gasps of the crowd, the dramatic reveal of the FAA ID. It was all there. It was a perfectly packaged 2-minute encapsulation of racial bias and corporate malfeasance. The internet did what the internet does. The video exploded. Gate agent. Linda and Imani Williams were trending worldwide within hours. The story was picked up by local Charlotte news, then national outlets like CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, each framing it according to their own particular slant. Imani's face was suddenly everywhere. She was lauded as a hero, a model of grace under pressure. Linda Peterson, whose full name was quickly unearthed by online sleuths, became an instant pariah, the face of Airport Karen, a symbol of white privilege run amok. For Imani, the sudden fame was disorienting and overwhelming. As she checked into her hotel, her phone was a ceaseless cacophony of notifications. Friend requests from strangers, messages of support, but also a darker undercurrent of hateful racist trolls. News reporters were somehow already calling her cell, leaving breathless voicemails. The conference she had come to attend her research on pediatric cardiac care suddenly seemed a world away. She called her husband, David, an architect, and tried to explain the surreal events of her day. "It's insane," she said, pacing her hotel room. "I just wanted to get on a plane." "I saw the video, honey," he said, his voice a mixture of anger and concern. "Are you okay?" "Really, I am," she said, "but this is a lot." Meanwhile, back in Charlotte, the corporate machinery of American Airlines had lurched into crisis mode. David Chen, the station manager, had been on the phone with corporate headquarters in Fort Worth since the moment he'd escorted Linda from the gate. The video was a PR nightmare of the highest order. It wasn't just a disgruntled customer. It was a black doctor, an FAA official, being harassed by their employee with video evidence. The initial statement from American Airlines was a piece of carefully crafted corporate speak released late in the afternoon. "We are aware of an incident that occurred this morning at Charlotte Douglas International Airport between a customer and a team member. We are deeply concerned by what we see in the video and have launched an immediate and thorough investigation. We are reaching out to Dr. Williams to apologize for her experience." The public's response was swift and derisive. "Deeply concerned, she should be fired," was a typical reply. "Thorough investigation." The video is the investigation. The pressure mounted. The stock price of American Airlines took a small but noticeable dip in after-hours trading. Rival airlines with a crocodile-like sympathy offered their condolences while secretly reveling in their competitors' misfortune. For Linda Peterson, the world had shrunk to the four walls of her modest suburban home. She had turned off her phone, but she couldn't shut out the world. Her husband Gary had watched the video, his face a mask of disbelief. "Linda, what were you thinking?" he had asked, his voice hollow. "You don't understand," she had sobbed. "The stress, the system was down, she was so condescending." But even to her own ears, the excuses sounded pathetic, flimsy shields against the hurricane of public opinion. Her son Kevin called from college. "Mom, is it true people are posting this video everywhere? They're saying you're a racist." The word hung in the air between them, an accusation more painful than any other. "No," Linda whispered, tears streaming down her face. I'm not a racist." But was that true? She had never thought of herself that way. She had black acquaintances. She was polite to black customers. But when the pressure was on, when her own anxieties had overwhelmed her, she had reached for the ugliest, most readily available stereotype in the American playbook. She had seen a black woman not as an individual, but as a threat. The realization was a cold, sickening stone in the pit of her stomach. The karma was just getting started. The next morning, a reporter from the Charlotte Observer was camped out on her front lawn. Her address had been leaked online. Vicious, threatening messages had been pushed under her front door. The fortress of her life, the one she had so carefully constructed, was being dismantled brick by brick. The thorough investigation by American Airlines was swift and decisive. There was no other choice. By the end of the day, Linda Peterson was officially terminated. The announcement was made public. But that was far from the end of it. Marcus Thorne, the lawyer who had defended Imani at the gate, had been in touch with her. "Imani," he had said over the phone, "this is bigger than just one bad employee. This is a systemic issue. American Airlines has a documented history of complaints regarding racial discrimination. Linda Peterson didn't just appear out of a vacuum. The company's culture allowed her to feel comfortable acting that way." He was right. As the story grew, other black and minority passengers began to come forward with their own stories of mistreatment by the airline. A flight attendant who had been passed over for promotion in favor of less qualified white colleagues. A pilot who had been subjected to random security screenings far more often than his white counterparts. A group of friends who had been kicked off a flight for being too loud when a group of white passengers in the next row were behaving far more boisterously. The incident at Gate C-37 was no longer just about Linda and Imani. It had become a flashpoint, a catalyst for a much larger conversation about systemic racism in the airline industry. Imani, after much soul-searching and a long conversation with her husband and with Marcus, decided she couldn't just let it go. Her presentation at the conference had been a success, but her mind was elsewhere. She felt a responsibility to use her newfound platform for something more. With Marcus Thorne as her legal counsel, she filed a civil lawsuit against American Airlines. The suit did not ask for a specific monetary amount. Instead, it demanded sweeping systemic changes within the company, mandatory, comprehensive, and ongoing racial bias training for all employees from the CEO down. The creation of an independent oversight committee to review all discrimination complaints, and the establishment of a scholarship fund for minority students pursuing careers in aviation. The lawsuit was a masterstroke. It elevated the conversation from a simple case of "he said, she said" to a demand for corporate accountability. It wasn't about punishing Linda Peterson, who was already facing a public crucifixion. It was about changing the system that had produced her. The corporate fallout for American Airlines was immense. The legal battle would be costly and damaging to their brand. Their attempts to settle out of court were rebuffed by Imani and Marcus. They wanted change, not a check. For Linda Peterson, the lawsuit was just another nail in the coffin of her old life. She was now not just a fired employee. She was the central figure in a landmark civil rights lawsuit. Her name would be forever linked with this case. She became a pariah in her own community. Old friends stopped calling. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid her. The financial strain with Gary still unemployed was crushing. They were forced to put their house on the market. The hard karma was relentless. It wasn't a single swift blow. It was a slow grinding and public disintegration of a life. Linda had tried to ruin Imani's day to assert her power over a black woman who she felt had challenged her. Instead, she had triggered a chain reaction that had not only destroyed her own life, but had also put one of the world's largest airlines on trial. The twists, however, were not yet over. The universe, it seemed, had one more turn of the screw in store for Linda Peterson, a piece of hard karma so direct, so personal, that it would make everything else pale in comparison. The real-life drama was about to hit home in the most devastating way imaginable. Months bled into one another. The autumn that had just begun on that fateful day in Gate C367 gave way to a bleak, unforgiving winter. For Linda Peterson, life had become a claustrophobic cycle of shame and anxiety. The lawsuit was a constant looming presence, a dark cloud that shadowed her every waking moment. Her name and face were now so infamous that she rarely left the house. The sale of their home was a slow, humiliating process, each open house a parade of strangers judging the remnants of her shattered life. Gary had finally found a job, but it was a low-paying retail position, a shadow of his former career. The financial strain was a constant grinding pressure, fraying the already tattered edges of their marriage. The silence in their house was a heavy blanket suffocating the memories of happier times. But the most profound consequence, the one that twisted the knife of karma in the most personal way, came from an unexpected quarter. It came from her son, Kevin. Kevin, her youngest, the one she worried about at Appalachian State, had become distant, his calls home growing even more infrequent. When he did call, the conversations were strained, stilted. He was ashamed of her, she knew. The infamy of gate agent Linda had reached his campus, and he was now the son of gate agent Linda. Then one cold, rainy evening in early March, they received a call. It wasn't from Kevin, but from a dean at the university. Kevin had been involved in an incident. He had been arrested for selling prescription anxiety medication. He was facing felony charges and had been expelled from the university. The news was a body blow, knocking the last of the air from Linda's lungs. Kevin, her baby, a felon. Expelled. His future, which had once seemed so bright, now lay in ruins. The drive to Boone was the longest 3 hours of Linda's life. Gary drove his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his silence a wall of condemnation. When they finally saw Kevin in the drab, sterile office of his court-appointed lawyer, he looked like a ghost. He was thin pale, his eyes hollowed out with fear and shame. He explained in a choked, halting voice what had happened. The pressure of his mother's viral infamy had been unbearable. He had been ostracized, mocked. His pre-existing anxiety, something he had always struggled with, had spiraled out of control. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't study. He had started selling some of his own prescribed Xanax to other students to make money to feel some semblance of control, he said. He had been caught in a campus-wide sting operation. "It's all my fault," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry." Linda looked at her broken son, and in that moment the full devastating weight of her actions on that September morning crashed down upon her. This was not about a lost job or public shaming or a lawsuit. This was the true cost of her prejudice. Her actions had not just ruined her own life, they had set off a chain reaction of pain and destruction that had now consumed her own child. The security risk she had projected onto a calm, professional black woman had been a phantom. The real security risk had been the poison in her own heart, a poison that had now seeped into the foundations of her own family and brought it crumbling down. The irony was so cruel, so precise, it was almost surgical. She had called the police on an innocent person, and now her own son was entangled in the legal system. She had judged a stranger with unearned moral superiority, and now her own family's deepest, most painful secrets were being laid bare in a courtroom. The legal battle for Kevin was arduous and expensive. They drained what little savings they had left. The house was sold at a loss. They moved into a small, cramped apartment, the air thick with unspoken resentment and grief. And then came the final, most devastating twist. Kevin's case was eventually heard. Due to his clean record and the extenuating circumstances, the judge was lenient. He was sentenced to 2 years of probation, mandatory drug counseling, and 500 hours of community service. It was a second chance, a lifeline. A few weeks later, Linda received a letter. It was from the probation office detailing the terms of Kevin's community service placement. He had been assigned to a local non-profit organization that provided support services for at-risk youth. The program focused on mentorship tutoring and helping young people navigate the challenges of the legal system. At the bottom of the letter was the name of the organization's founder and executive director, the person Kevin would be reporting to for the next 2 years. Dr. Imani Williams. Linda stared at the name, her blood turning to ice. It couldn't be. It was a cosmic joke of the cruelest kind, a statistical impossibility. But there it was in black and white. Imani, as part of her commitment to using her platform for good, had started the foundation with a portion of the initial settlement money from a pre-lawsuit mediation with American Airlines. The organization was her passion project, her way of creating something positive out of the ugliness she had endured. It was based in Charlotte, her home. The karma was no longer just hard. It was poetic. It was inescapable. It was a circle, closing in on itself. Linda Peterson had tried to destroy Dr. Imani Williams' reputation and career. Now her own son's future. His very rehabilitation was in the hands of the woman she had so grievously wronged. Linda dropped the letter, her body trembling. She thought of Imani, of her calm, steady gaze in the face of her own unhinged rage. She thought of the profound, weary sadness in Imani's eyes as she had been led away in shame. There had been no malice there, no triumph, only a deep, human decency. And now her son, her broken, beloved son, was being delivered into the care of that same decency. He would be mentored, guided, and perhaps even saved by the very person his mother had tried to cast as a villain. Linda sank to the floor of her small, unfamiliar apartment, the letter lying beside her like a judgment. The tears that came were not tears of self-pity or of rage. They were tears of a final, crushing, and absolute surrender. A surrender to the vast, intricate, and terrifyingly just machinery of consequence. She had hit rock bottom. But as she wept, a tiny, unfamiliar seed began to sprout in the barren landscape of her soul. It was a seed of humility, and with it, the faintest, most fragile possibility of redemption. The real-life drama was at last complete. The karma had not just hit back. It had offered a lesson as brutal and as brilliant as life itself. The story of Linda Peterson and Dr. Imani Williams isn't just a viral video. It's a powerful real-life drama that shows how a single moment of prejudice can have consequences that ripple out in ways we can never predict. It's a story of how grace can be found in the most unexpected places, and how karma, when it hits, can be more than just punishment. It can be a profound and life-altering lesson. Dr. Williams didn't seek revenge. She sought to build something better. And in the end, the woman who tried to be her adversary was forced to witness that grace firsthand in the most personal way imaginable. If this story moved you, if it made you think, please hit that like button to let us know. Share it with your friends and family because these are the conversations we need to be having. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more true stories that matter. What do you think? Was this karma or something more? Let us know in the comments below.